This program brought to you by KFC. Nobody does chicken like KFC.
Ten's Late News with Tracey Spicer.
Tonight, America tipped to attack Iraq within the month with or without UN sanction. The hunt for man-eating sharks in coastal canals continues. And England cricketers think long and hard about whether to boycott World Cup matches in Zimbabwe. Good evening. First claims war with Iraq is just weeks away. Former Chief Weapons Inspector Richard Butler says he's convinced America will begin bombing by early March. And Prime Minister Howard holds little hope for a peaceful solution of the Iraq crisis. He's also linked his political future with the disarming of Saddam Hussein, saying the world must condemn Iraq unanimously to avoid war.
A red carpet, a blanket of snow and a heightened security alert greeted John Howard in Washington. The Australian Prime Minister warmly welcomed by the United States administration as a willing ally. John Howard confident our views matter at the White House.
I mean, we don't want to exaggerate it, but equally we don't want to be shrinking violets about our capacity to have an influence.
A view reinforced by this assessment of Australia and our PM by a key member of the Bush administration.
The United States has no better friend and no longer standing friend than Australia.
The Prime Minister also found himself watching his step on the domestic political front after his pledge to see the Iraqi issue through to its conclusion was interpreted as a change in his private retirement timetable.
Any suggestion of walking away from my responsibilities during a time like this would be, quite out of the question.
It's the only decision he can take, Paul. I mean, he can't commit our troops and not himself. That's the point of it.
Checking into the President's exclusive Washington guest house, Mr Howard will meet the American leader Tuesday, our time.
With Australia and the US singing the same tune on Iraq, both leaders know their main task now is to extract a workable agreement out of the UN Security Council. John Howard says the only way war can be averted now is unanimous world opinion forcing Saddam Hussein to back down.
A desirable but unlikely outcome.
The prospects of a peaceful resolution don't look good at present.
In Washington, Greg Turnbull, 10 News.
Defence Minister Robert Hill is tipping that if there is war with Iraq, victory will be quick. And America says the world will know within weeks if such action is necessary.
Thousands of British soldiers are expected to follow these tanks to the Gulf next week. 42,000 Brits are being deployed, joining 110,000 American soldiers already in the region. US Defence Secretary Donald Rumsfeld tried to rally support for war from European leaders today, but ran into some tough opposition.
You have to make the case. And to make a case in the democracy, you must convince by yourself. Excuse me, I'm not convinced. This is my problem. And I cannot go to the public and say, oh, well, let's go to war because there are reasons and so on, and I don't believe in that.
Germany and France say weapons inspectors need more time, and they've been working on a plan which includes tripling the number of inspectors, with UN peacekeepers providing protection. Secretary Rumsfeld didn't back down.
It's difficult to believe that there still could be question in the minds of reasonable people open to the facts before them.
Chief Weapons Inspector Hans Blix met with Iraqi officials in Baghdad. He says the talks were substantial.
We are continuing tomorrow and it is a useful discussion.
Blix is expected to press for the passage of legislation to outlaw weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. In his national radio address, President George Bush told the nation to brace itself for war if the UN doesn't stand behind its demands of Iraq to disarm.
Having made its demands, the Security Council must not back down when those demands are defied and mocked by a dictator.
The Pope said the world should not resign itself to war. He will meet with Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz later this week. Michelle Stone, in the United States, 10 News.
The hunt for the Gold Coast man-eater has netted 3 large sharks, but none could be linked to the death of an 84-year-old man yesterday. Locals are stunned by the attack, but fishermen say hundreds of sharks may inhabit Queensland's coastal canals.
Shark catchers were quickly working to trap the killer of 84-year-old Bob Purcell. He was attacked during an early morning swim in a Burleigh canal. Within hours, the contractors had a horrifying haul. 3 bull sharks up to 2.2 metres long, one still alive. Locals were stunned.
Yeah, we take the children in about probably only 2 or 3 metres in, and they thrash around with the dog, and everybody does on the lake.
The children have been swimming here for a long time. I think it's a bit frightening, really.
The dead sharks did not contain human remains, but Craig Newton says there are more.
It's a huge canal system. We've got 200 kilometres of canal frontage on the Gold Coast, so you'd be talking hundreds of sharks.
We've been told there are things there, but we never believed them.
Some locals believe a lock at the lake entrance keeps sharks out, but it opens daily. The Queensland Government and the Gold Coast City Council will consider new warnings and possible swimming bans.
Meetings will take place early next week, just to make sure that there is a calm and collected assessment of the situation.
Bob Purcell's relatives today warned others to stay out of the canals.
After this, I think no one should be in it unless the powers that be put more nets out and more lines to catch these sharks.
Shark catching will continue for at least a week. Mark Sulo, 10 News.
Politics is still plaguing the World Cup cricket series in Africa. The England cricket team again deferred a decision on boycotting matches scheduled for Zimbabwe, but speculation remains intense that they will refuse to play there because of death threats.
The World Cup opening ceremony had all the fanfare expected of an event with a global audience of 1 billion. South African culture showcased by 4,500 performers to herald the biggest sporting competition ever staged on the African continent.
I'm now honoured to declare this 8th ICC Cricket World Cup tournament officially open.
But the celebration did little to soothe the tension that's dogged the lead up to the World Cup. Right up until the start of the opening ceremony, the English team was locked in negotiations about whether to play in co-host nation Zimbabwe. The team is scheduled to play there in 4 days. An appeal to have the match moved to South Africa was unsuccessful. Already, New Zealand has announced it won't play in Kenya because of security concerns. Now, British newspaper reports say the English team has received death threats against players and their families, warning them not to play in Zimbabwe. It's claimed the threats by a group called the Sons and Daughters of Zimbabwe could have been made while the team was on its 3-month tour of Australia. A boycott will bring with it heavy financial penalties for the English Cricket Board, and experts have tipped that an English boycott will increase the chances of the Australian team also pulling out of its matches in Zimbabwe. Fiona Clark, 10 News.
And still to come in 10's late news, riot police under fire as teenage gate crashers go on the rampage. A new campaign to combat a disease that kills almost 1,000 Australian women every year. And thousands hoping for a miracle when workers restore a fence where the Virgin Mary is said to appear. You're watching 10's Late News. Wild scenes in suburban Perth as guests at another party get out of hand. Police in riot gear called to control hundreds of young gate crashers who rampaged after being refused entry. Residents in Rivet Way cowered behind locked doors as the frightening scenes unfolded.
Kids bashed and left lying in the street and unable to get an ambulance for at least half an hour.
Even police were forced to retreat when the crowd started showering them with bottles and bricks.
The mobs were throwing rocks at them and trying to smash up the police car. So it's just total insanity.
It went out of hand. You had 4 police cars bolting away, which left us without any protection for at least half an hour.
Dozens of officers returned in full riot gear, some on horseback. The police helicopter hovered overhead.
The whole community would have suffered in the service that we could have provided last night because of that party.
10 News understands an 18-year-old man was stabbed in the stomach, while another person sustained serious head injuries. 4 police officers were also hurt. The wild party was held at this house. Neighbours are furious. They say it's not the first time a party's ended in brawls and damaged their homes.
Well, it has to be stopped. I mean, that place down there, which is becoming a regular place now, that's 3 times in 6 months. I mean, they need to move. Go away.
Ben Harrison hosted the party. He says he only sent out 80 invitations, but by 11 o'clock, the crowd had swollen to several hundred.
And I think basically what happened was word of mouth. And the problem these days is everybody, they hear about a party and they think it's their God-given right to come to a party.
Mr Harrison says the crowds were under control while the party was contained to the backyard. But once people were forced out onto the street, tempers flared.
I am truly sorry for all this about the gate crashes all rocking up. I mean, we tried our best.
Police have charged 1 juvenile with disorderly conduct. Inquiries are continuing. Charmaine Dragoon, 10 News. Dozens of Australian women who've become pregnant while using a new contraceptive device are to take legal action. The Implanon rod, which releases a contraceptive when injected under the skin, had been hailed almost fail-safe. But over the past 18 months, up to 130 women have become pregnant while using the device. The problem is blamed on a few doctors not following directions, but women using the device are being urged not to panic.
If you can feel it, you are safe. If you cannot feel it, contact your doctor, use a backup method of contraception in the meantime.
A hard-hitting advertising campaign has been launched as the latest weapon in the battle against ovarian cancer, a disease that kills 800 Australian women every year.
Ovarian cancer is an insidious disease. Its symptoms easily brushed aside as nothing serious.
Our daughter died from backache.
My mum died from bad indigestion.
But it's hoped this new national advertising campaign will improve awareness about an illness that kills 1 woman every 10 hours.
If a woman is experiencing these unusual symptoms and are persistent, she needs to go to her family doctor and say to her family doctor, could I have ovarian cancer?
Melbourne mother of 3, Kerry Hancock, like many women, initially ignored the signs, including backache, cramps and extreme fatigue. Now she is in the midst of her own battle with the silent killer.
It's 10 months now and I haven't worked. I've just gone through chemo and just finished radiotherapy 3 weeks ago.
And although it affects mostly women in their 50s and 60s, ovarian cancer isn't unheard of among younger women.
And it's going to come across all age groups. 4 days ago, I had to sit down with a teenager and tell her that she had an incurable ovarian cancer.
Doctors have also warned women that pap smear tests don't detect the disease. A similar test for ovarian cancer is still several years away. Nicole Strawn, 10 News.
10 years after the death of famous Australian eye doctor Fred Hollows, a medical milestone. Surgeons performed their 1 millionth intraocular lens operation to restore sight to a woman blinded by cataracts. The Fred Hollows Foundation has launched a new campaign, 5 Fivers for Fred, to give people in developing nations access to cataract surgery for as little as $25. Relief for thousands of worshippers left distraught by the vandalism of a unique attraction in Sydney. Work begins in the morning to repair a fence famous for looking like the Virgin Mary. But the workmen aren't promising any miracles.
To the hordes who've been making a daily pilgrimage to the site, it's nothing short of sacrilege. Vandals smashing the fence, which has been lauded by many as an apparition of the Virgin Mary. It's become one of Sydney's newest attractions. Crowds pouring in between 3 and 5 each afternoon to get a glimpse. For countless worshippers, a place to pay homage.
I'm upset because it's not fair. Not fair.
It's tragic, you know what I mean? Whether you believe in what was going on here or not, yeah, certainly uncalled for.
The woman who first brought it to public attention now wants to protect her identity after several threats. She's not surprised by the attack.
I actually expected things of this nature because after receiving death threats and hate mail, I was angry, obviously. When I first saw it, I thought, mindless, senseless, nasty people who don't wish to share.
And it's not the first time a toilet bowl had been chained to the site on one occasion and the white fence painted red and green. Now, authorities have already tried to keep people at a distance from the shrine by previously roping off the spot. But with the damage now having been done, followers are calling for a more permanent protection to be put in place. And that could be just days away. While the local council has ruled out a full-time security guard on the scene, it's considering several options to stop further vandalism. Meantime, engineers will be on the job first thing in the morning, but they're not promising any miracles. They say fixing the fence is one thing, bringing Mary back is another. Frank Coletta, 10 News.
And when 10's Late News continues, anger at the pittance paid to a war hero's widow. The host of a shock TV show out to shock more than his audience. Then in sports tonight, Steve Waugh's forlorn stand in the ING Cup. There's outrage over the compensation paid to the widow of a war hero. Kylie Russell receives a $30,000 a year allowance following the death of her husband Andrew, an SAS sergeant killed by a landmine in Afghanistan last year. Mrs. Russell says the widows of serving politicians receive a minimum of $50,000 a year for life. She's mounting a campaign for better compensation for the families of Australian troops being sent to the Middle East. New talk of tax cuts from the Prime Minister. Mr Howard says he's planning to raise the threshold for paying the top tax rate from $60,000 to $75,000. But the opposition says the government can't deliver on the pledge.
More courageous. We've already had the Treasurer telling us that all the money's being spent on the war. This will be a war budget, so I don't think there'll be terribly much in there for working families or anyone else.
Another scandal for the Catholic Church in Australia. The choir master of our oldest cathedral is suing for wrongful dismissal, saying he hasn't been told why he's been sacked, but suspects it's because he once lived with a pedophile.
David Russell has his supporters, and they came together today for the media to rally around the man who led the music at Sydney St Mary's Catholic Cathedral for 28 years. Mr Russell was sacked 9 days ago and considers it a terrible mistake and believes it's due to the fact he lived for a short time with a pedophile.
I am making a case for unfair dismissal. I have engaged solicitors and they are preparing the application now.
George Pell is the Archbishop of St Mary's.
Archbishop George Pell knows what it's like to be falsely accused. I understand he has not been directly involved in my matter. As a man of God, I call upon him to rectify this injustice to me.
4 years ago, David Russell was charged with 3 counts of indecent assault, but the allegations were dismissed.
And he's someone that we just absolutely trust with our children. He's just an amazing man. He is St Mary's Cathedral music. He has built it up to an international reputation.
Her 18-year-old son added his support.
It's not as if it's just blind faith that's leading us to trust in David. We know that there have been serious problems in the investigation the church has conducted.
The Catholic Church isn't revealing why they sacked David Russell, but when the matter makes it to court, they will be forced to explain their decision. Kevin Wild, 10 News.
The Liberal Party in New South Wales has a new star recruit with a name known internationally. Michael Chamberlain, whose baby daughter Azaria was killed by a dingo in 1980, now wants to be a politician. He'll stand as a Liberal candidate in next month's election. It'll prove a tough fight though. He'll need a swing of 19% to win the seat of Lake Macquarie. He's the host of one of the most notorious TV shows in the world, but that's no longer enough for Jerry Springer. In a move that will shock some of his fans and plenty of his enemies, Jerry Springer is seeking a more influential stage.
A normal day for a man who works in anything but a normal world.
What's up, Jerry?
Hey.
Well, man.
Only rarely do people admit to watching the Jerry Springer Show, yet ratings prove it's one of the most watched shows in the world.
Almost 25,000 people have been on our show. That's a nation of perverts.
Are they all for real?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fake, but they're real.
Of course, a vital part of the Jerry Springer Show experience is the audience. Their chanting has become a signature of the program, and their questions provide special insights. Let's meet them.
I want to see some scorn lovers going on up in here, okay?
I don't know, I want to see some chairs get busted over some heads or something.
He's the man. He's sexy.
He's sexy, really?
Yes.
Once inside, the audience gets trained in the special art of chanting. And once they're primed, they'll chant pretty much whatever you tell them to. And Jerry Springer is now thinking of harnessing that popularity and making a move into politics. He's already dabbled. He was a congressional aide to Robert Kennedy and was mayor of Cincinnati in his 30s. But now he's setting his sights higher, considering running for the US Senate next year.
Obviously, I'm very well known now, so that's a political plus, and have a fan base, that's a plus. But there are also people who hate the show and therefore would vote against me just because they hate the show.
Oh, and he has one other deep, dark secret. He sings.
You actually opened for Billy Ray Cyrus. Now I understand you're happy to admit that on national television in Australia.
Yeah. If other things didn't ruin my career, why would this?
There's Oprah, Bill, and Sally, and Jerry Springer's too.
Angela Bishop, 10 News.
I'll be back shortly with the latest on the national weather front. Then Matthew White joins us with Sports Tonight.
Thanks, Tracey. Coming up, we've got Davis Cup tennis, the final round of the ANZ Championship. England names its squad to face the Socceroos, and the razzle-dazzle of the NBA's All-Star Weekend.
Now the national weather details. On the synoptic chart, lows in the northern half are associated with troughs running from the southwest across the top end and down the eastern half. A high is moving slowly across the bight. So today should see thunderstorms around Cairns and Townsville, showers for Brisbane. Late thunderstorms in Sydney and Canberra, showers for Hobart, drizzle clearing in Melbourne, mainly sunny in Adelaide, possible thunderstorms for Perth and the top end with fine conditions across the centre. And that's the latest from the 10 Newsroom. Thanks for joining us. I'll be back with our next national bulletin at 11:30 in the morning, but stick around now for Sports Tonight with Matthew White. I'm Tracey Spicer. Goodbye.